In this video, I will be servicing or lubricating the brakes on my Mazda 3. It's a 2013, and it's the Sky Active version, although that's not important. I got socket sets, I've got some gloves, some shop towels, Scotch-Brite pads. I got some additional sockets for the breaker bars. I got tons of brake clean. Got some WD-40. I got the silicone ceramic brake lube, which is critical. I got this thing, but it doesn't work, so I kind of toss it. I got more brake lubricant, flathead screwdriver, some needle nose. You do need the Allen keys or hex wrenches, specifically the 7mm, and I got some wire brushes to clean things up with as well. So before jacking the vehicle up, I'm going to loosen the lug nuts on the rear driver's side tire, and that's the first brake I'm going to do. Once the lug nuts are loosened up, I'll jack it up, throw an axle stand under there just in case it slips, and take the tire off the rest of the way. I would not advise wearing flip-flops when you're working on your car, but it's pretty hot out, and I like to live dangerously. So the brake slide pins are protected by little rubber caps, so those need to be popped off. And then there's also a little metal wire clip that connects the brake caliper to the brake caliper mounting bracket. Once the clip's off, you can remove the brake caliper slider pins. Now for these slider pins, again, it's a 7mm hex or Allen key. Obviously I'm using it on a ratchet. I didn't find there's any requirement to use the breaker bar on these. First of all, they only get torqued to 20, maybe 22 foot-pounds of torque. And the other thing is they're encased in that rubber, so they're not really exposed to the elements. I do find that the flathead helps to push them out a little bit because they are sort of encased in a tight rubber. And then once the two slider pins are fully backed off, you should be able to just work the brake caliper straight back and off the vehicle. You can see there's two brake lines going to it, and for this I'm just setting it up onto a spot where it won't fall down. You may want to strap it down as well. You can see the inner brake pad has a wire clip on the top of it, so it can't be confused with the outer brake pad, which does not have that clip. And you can see that both of these are in pretty good condition, but I've already measured those in a different video. And you can see that they're very well lubed up as well. So now I'll take off the caliper mounting bracket. It's got two bolts holding it to the vehicle, and I'm going to hit those with a bit of penetrant spray first. Because there's no abutment clips on this, I can't really clean that up very well, so that's why I'm taking off the caliper mounting bracket. And just while I'm waiting for the penetrant spray to do its magic on the rusted bolts, I'm just going to clean up these brake pads a little bit, wipe them down, and get all the grime off the back. One thing I would say is the shop where I had these installed did put a lot of grease on the back of the pad. To help clean them up, I'm using some brake parts cleaner, nothing too special, and some shop towels. And I'm just cleaning up all the parts of the brake pad, and then when I install them, I'll re-lubricate everything as well. So I'll just set the brake pads aside and let those things dry off. This is a 14mm socket. The bolts for the rear caliper mounting brackets are 14mm, so they are smaller than the front, and I'll go over the front a little bit later. Overall, not too difficult to break free, but if they are rusty, obviously they can be a little bit challenging. And once I get them moving with the breaker bar, I'll just take a ratchet and loosen them up a little quicker. The rear ones don't have obvious blue Loctite on them, but there is definitely a little bit of Loctite. It's just a little hard to see. So for the slider pins, they just pull straight out. These do look like they're the same, although I do advise putting them back in the same position that they came out of. Although, like I said, they do look like they're the same size. So like I said, the little tool I got to back the piston in does not fit in there. So I'm only going to back it up about 1 millimeter or 2. You can do this effectively with a pair of needle nose pliers. Pretty easy to do, really. Definitely the $10 tool wasn't worth getting. To clean up the slider pins, I just use a little bit of WD-40, and then clean them up with the shop towels. And then I'm going to lubricate them with the silicone-based lubricant. Really just get them slimy again and reinstall them where they need to be. You could take a Q-tip or something and clean up the rubber boots that they slide inside of, but in this case I didn't do that, and they seem like they're moving fine and there's no grinding, so I'm pretty sure it's fine, but that is an option that you can do. I'm also going to put the lubricant on the face of the piston, as well as the two wings of the brake caliper. So I kind of cleaned up the brake caliper mounting bracket off screen, but I just used a bit of WD-40, the wire brush, and then I hosed it down with some brake parts cleaner. And it is a very rusty piece, so I'm quite surprised that the brake pads are actually sliding in there as well as they were. I'm lubricating this before I put it on the vehicle in an effort to keep the lubricant off the brake rotor. And just before I put the caliper mounting bracket on, I'm going to just clean up the brake rotor a little bit with a bit of the brake cleaner and a clean shop towel. I didn't find it was overly dirty, but because I was spraying some liquid penetrant, particularly on the backside, I want to just give it a wipe down, make sure all that's off. For the installation of the caliper bracket, I'm going to use blue Loctite on each of the bolts. And again, those are for both 14 millimeter. And obviously the caliper mounting bracket just goes back on the same way it came off. There's not very many options for it to go on. And I found that you could bring the bolts almost all the way in just by hand, and then you can go to the torque wrench. For these 14 millimeter bolts, the torque specification I am using is 56 foot-pounds for each of them. And now I can put everything back together, so I'll put the outer brake pad on. You can see where it rides there. And then I will put the inner brake pad on as well. And I'm just adding a little bit of extra lubricant on the sliding surfaces of the brake pad. And once again, you don't want to get the lubricant on the brake rotor or on the pad face. There are no shims on the back of these pads. I don't know if other Mazda 3 brake pads come with removable shims. So for these, I'm just going to add some more of the lubricant onto the back of the pad. So I did find the brake caliper was fairly tight to put back on with those two brake lines going to the caliper, but overall pretty easy to get on. So once it's back in place, I'll just push the slider pins back in, get the ratchet again with the 7 millimeter Allen or hex key, and then I'll torque those down to spec, and the torque spec I'm using for these is 22 foot-pounds for both the upper and lower slider pins. Once the slider pins are torqued down, I'm just going to put the cap back on, going to add a little bonus lubricant in there, put it back in place, and then same thing for the lower one, I'll add a little bit of bonus lubricant to the cap and then put it back in place. And really the last thing to do with the brakes is to attach the spring, and you can see it inserts into the brake caliper, and then the wings go out over the brake caliper mounting bracket. A little bit tight, but the flathead screwdriver definitely helps out, and just going to tap it into place and make sure that it's seated correctly in the brake caliper. And that's pretty much it for that one. So throw this in super fast motion and I will get onto the front one as well. So I'll get the tire back on the vehicle. Obviously I'm going to have to lower it, put the lug nuts into the tire. Snug up all the lug nuts, but not worry about bringing them all the way to torque spec. Remove the jack stand and lower the vehicle. Once the vehicle is lowered, I'm going to use the torque wrench to bring all of the lug nuts to 90 foot-pounds. The passenger side brake is identical, so I'm not going to go over it in this video. Okay, for the front brakes, I'll speed it up a little bit. Obviously, the tire comes off the same way. There are also the two rubber plugs on the rubber boots for the slider pins. And there's the same wire clip that goes from the brake caliper to the brake caliper mounting bracket. These slider pins are the same as the rear. They are 7mm Allen key or hexes, and they break free fairly easily. And same deal, I just used a flathead screwdriver to push them out and get them out of the way so I could actually get the brake caliper off. Then obviously once they're out of the way, brake caliper just lifts off and out. For this one, I'm just using a strap and hanging it from the suspension. And the slider pins just wiggle out. And again, same deal. They appear to be the same, but I would put them back in the same spot. And just like the rear, I am going to take off the mounting bracket. I'm kind of doing a 2-for-1 out of this this video. This is also the same video I used for my brake pad replacement. The socket to remove the caliper mounting bracket is a 17mm, and I did break them free with the breaker bar and then used the ratchet to get them off the rest of the way. So I cleaned it up off camera. Obviously I put a new rotor on, but that's not really part of this video. For this one, I lubricated it on the vehicle. I would recommend doing it the way I did it on the rear and lubricate these things off the vehicle. For the torque spec for this caliper mounting bracket, I used 70 foot-pounds. What I've picked up online is that the specification is between 61 and 74 foot-pounds for the mounting bracket on the front. So it's not the same, keep that in mind, it is more. Just like the rear, I'm going to lubricate all the surfaces that come in contact with the brake pads. So the inner brake pad on this is a spring-loaded jobby, and it just fits into the brake piston. Pretty straightforward. And then the brake caliper just slides back into place. For the pins, I cleaned them up using WD-40 and some shop towels, and then just like the rear, added the lubricant to the slider pins. And then they just slide back in place. And once again, using the 7mm to tighten up the slider pins. And this time they do have the same torque spec as the rear, and I've got actually a range of 19 to 22 foot-pounds for the torque spec on those slider pins, and I used 20 foot-pounds for the front. And just like on the rear brakes, prior to putting the caps back in, I do put lubricant in both the upper and lower caps. And the replacement of the wire clip is the same as the rear. So get the front tire back on, tighten the lug nuts, remove the axle stand, drop the vehicle, and then use the torque wrench to bring all the lug nuts up to 90 foot-pounds. One thing to note, you do want to pump the brakes a few times, make sure everything's working properly before ripping off down the road. Overall, pretty quick and easy job, not very expensive. It should take about 2 hours in total, maybe 3 if you're taking your time. Thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.